Saviad Olam. Hallelujah. Yada-da-da, where's my lighter? Yada-da-da, yada-da-da. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? And apologize for being a couple minutes late. Yehud in South Carolina, Renee in Indiana, Bill in Missouri, Nancy, North Carolina, Stephen in Maine, Rome, Maine, not New Hampshire, Shandor in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Gail in Kansas City, Yost, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Bella in Texas, Joe in the Inland Empire, Jimmy Gibson, shalom from Kentucky. Welcome, Jimmy. Always great to see a new name in the comments. Aoife in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Patrice in Utah, Alan in New York City, Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Double Daf. And Augusto in Lakeland, Florida. We're picking this up right near the bottom of page 13a. We got a good head start today, so we can do the double daf. And I want to confirm this. I think we're going to be now 1 day behind on the daf yomi schedule. Today's scheduled daf is Avoda Zara 15, and we're going to be on 13 and 14. So pretty good. Pretty good. Only 1 page behind after today, God willing. We are continuing our discussion of Mishna number 5 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Avoda Zara, the 27th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of the idolatrous festivals, defining them, understanding them so that we can avoid doing business with the idolaters or in any way encouraging them to or enabling them to or even, God forbid, participating in their idolatry. So Mishnah number 5 was talking about in a city or in a marketplace of idolaters. So if there's a shop that is clearly adorned for the purpose of worshiping their idol, we don't go in there. But if it's not so adorned, even though it's owned by an idolater, we can go in and transact business. Okay, near the bottom of 13a, the Gemara returns to discuss the Baraisa that cited the opinion of Rabbi Nassim. The master said above, any animal that one bought there, and we're talking about the bazaar in Gaza, where Gaza itself was filled with idolaters and having an idolatrous festival, but the marketplace outside the city, you could go and do business there. But Rabbi Nassim says, or the master said above, any animal that one bought there from these idolaters who were participating in idolatry should be destroyed. The Jew should not bring home such an animal and make use of it. So the Gemara asks, but isn't there a requirement to prevent suffering to animals? That's an actual Torah law. You cannot, you must prevent suffering to animals. So how does that, so here we have two values intersecting, the obligation to prevent suffering to animals and the prohibition on benefiting in any way from idolatry. So isn't there a requirement to prevent suffering to animals? And Abaye said, although there is a prohibition on causing suffering to a living creature, it is permitted when necessary, as the merciful one states to Joshua in Joshua 11:6, you shall destroy their horses, right? You cannot benefit from the horses of these idolaters. So the master said above, and what constitutes destroying the animal? So it's not clear what this means. It's not like you're, cutting off the feet of the animals. You're making some kind of a cut in their leg, which is going to render it blemished, right? At the very least, it's going to be blemished so that it never could be used as an offering. So one makes a cut in the hooves of the animal from or below the knee. And the Gemara raised a contradiction from a Baraisa. One may neither consecrate objects nor dedicate items for sacred use, nor valuate an item's worth based on its appraisal, and dedicate its monetary worth to the temple treasury in the present time when the temple no longer exists, right? So once the temple was destroyed, and we're still living in this extended 2,000 years long exile, and in the absence of the Holy Temple, post Holy Temple period, what that means is we can't bring offerings to the Most High. The altar is not available. All of the laws in the Torah about the daily offerings and about consecrating animals to be brought as offerings were unable to perform those mitzvahs. Now, why that's relevant here, we're really just looking at a piece of this law, but this law that they're bringing in to examine a piece from it says that you can't consecrate an animal, right? Because if you consecrate it and then you can't offer it because there is no holy temple to offer it in, and we don't make offerings outside the location where the Holy One enables us to do that. We have not made any animal offerings since the temple was destroyed. Therefore, in the absence of a temple and the ability to bring such animals as offerings, we do not consecrate such animals. It is absolutely prohibited to consecrate animals in this post-temple period, because if you did consecrate an animal, what would you do with it? You would be in this impossible situation. And since now that the animal is consecrated and it cannot be offered up on the altar, there is a risk that somebody will come to make personal use, right, to derive personal benefit from an animal that is consecrated to the divine. That would be violating the prohibition on meila, right, deriving personal benefit from something that belongs to the holy. But since you can't bring it as an offering, and you're afraid that somebody might come to make use of it, right, to misuse consecrated property, you're going to have to destroy the animal. So lest you be in that situation, the sages have decreed no consecration of animals in this period. Well, what if somebody consecrated anyway? That's the problem. Then what are you going to do? Right. So what kind of... Right. So now the Gemara is going to raise a contradiction from this Baraisa, which says we cannot consecrate in this period, but if we do, then we have to get rid of the animal. And from that, we're going to draw a conflict, some kind of contradiction to what we just learned about if you purchase an animal from an idolater and you need to render it unusable or destroy it. So one may neither consecrate objects nor dedicate items for sacred use, nor make an evaluation of their worth for the purpose of consecrating them in the present time when the temple no longer exists. And if one did consecrate or dedicate or evaluate items for sacred use, the presence of these items might lead to the violation of meila, the prohibition against using consecrated property for oneself. Might lead to the violation of the prohibition against using consecrated property. Therefore, if one dedicated an animal and violated this Baraisa, then it should be destroyed. So if he dedicated produce, garments, or vessels made from materials that decompose, he should store them until they decompose. And if he dedicated money or metal vessels, he should take them and cast them into the Dead Sea. So now that we've said, if you consecrate an animal, it must be destroyed, that's what's relevant here. So the Gemara asks, and now we're on page 13b, and what constitutes destroying? So he locks the door before it, and the animal dies on its own from hunger. So according to the Brisa, the disposal of the animal is carried out by starving it, not by cutting its hooves and rendering it unusable. Now listen, the first thing we think when we hear this is like, what kind of terrible cruelty is that because some human made a mistake and consecrated an animal when he shouldn't have, that the solution to this issue is they're going to lock the animal in a room and starve it to death. This sounds awful. And I don't know if this was ever actually done. They're saying in theory that's what would have to be done, and therefore don't consecrate an animal so that you're going to end up in this situation. And if you're unwilling to starve the animal, then you would be guilty of some other prohibition that you have violated, right? So really what this is about is don't do it. And this is why you don't do it. So Abaye said there in the case of a consecrated animal, the method employed is different because cutting the animal's hooves, like we would for something purchased from an idolater, would cause the degradation of sacrificial animals. So the Gemara asks, but why? So that's why we don't do it to something that's consecrated, while we might do it to an animal that we purchased from an idolater and that we now can't use because it came from an idolater. So the Gemara asks, well, why not simply state that he should slaughter the animal? Isn't that the simplest thing? Okay, we can't use the animal. We can't sell the animal. Okay, so just slaughter the animal. Animals die all the time. Why make it suffer needlessly? And the Gemara answers, if he were to slaughter it, someone might come to experience a mishap through it, meaning that he would eat the meat and thereby misuse consecrated property because it's not available for eating, even if it's a kosher animal slaughtered in a kosher manner, because it was consecrated and therefore humans can't benefit from it. The Gemara asks, but why not let him render the animal a shard, a gestera, by mutilating it so that it is unfit to be eaten? Like, for instance, if you slaughter it in a manner that renders it an Avoda. It was killed, but not in a kosher manner. You could do that absolutely painlessly. Why is it necessary to kill it in such a drawn-out fashion by starving it to death? And Abaye said that it is because the verse states, and you shall break down their altars, but you shall not do so to the Lord your God, in Deuteronomy 12, verses 3 and 4. And it is derived from here that one may not actively destroy any sacred item. Rava said there is a different reason that a consecrated animal may not be disposed of by cutting its hooves. It is because it appears as though he is inflicting a blemish on a sacrificial animal. And the Gemara asks, why does Rava say that it merely appears as though he is inflicting a blemish, when in fact he is inflicting a full-fledged blemish? And the Gemara answers, this matter, that one may not inflict a blemish on a sacrificial animal, applies only when the temple is standing, as the animal is fit for sacrifice and he renders it unfit. By contrast, now when the animal is not fit for sacrifice, since there is no temple, we have no problem with it by Torah law. The only problem is that it appears as though one is inflicting a blemish on a sacrificial animal. Let me change screens here. Okay. So the Gemara asks, but this should be considered equivalent to one who inflicts a blemish on an animal that is already blemished, which is prohibited even though that animal is not fit for sacrifice. And the Gemara answers, in the case of a blemished animal, when the temple is standing, it is prohibited to inflict a blemish upon it, even though it's already blemished. So you're not rendering it not fit for sacrifice, since it's already not fit for sacrifice. Nevertheless, you can't add a blemish to a blemished sacrificial animal, as granted, it itself is not fit to serve as an offering, but it is fit to make use of its monetary value, i.e. another animal may be purchased with the proceeds of its sale and sacrificed in its place. And therefore adding another blemish will lower its value. This is to the exclusion of that case here when there is no temple, as the animal is not fit for its monetary value, and it is not fit to serve as an offering itself, and so we can't make use of it in any way, nor put ourselves in a situation where we might accidentally misuse it, and that's why we have to destroy the animal. New subject. Rabbi Yonah found Rabbi Eli, who was standing at the entrance to the city of Tyre. And Rabbi Yonah said to him, the Baraisa cited above teaches that if one bought an animal at a pagan fair, it should be destroyed. Well, what should be done with a slave purchased at a pagan fair? Right? So, okay, you can't make benefit. You can't benefit from this animal that you bought from the idolaters at a pagan fair. You shouldn't have bought it all, but you did. So now you're just going to have to destroy that animal. Okay, well, what if you buy a slave? Now we're going to put aside for a second the horrible immorality, shocking immorality of slavery, because slavery in the ancient world was, just so common. It was an absolute fact of life everywhere in the ancient world. So then, if you purchased a slave from these idolaters, sounds like it's going to have the same problem, right? The money that you paid the idolater for the slave is going to be go and used for for idolatrous worship. So how are you going to be able to benefit from this slave that you bought? And you don't want anyone to benefit from it. So are you going to kill the slave? Obviously, it's a human being, not an animal. What are you going to do? That's the question. What should be done with a slave that was purchased at a pagan fair? And Rabbi Yonah elaborated the question. I do not raise the dilemma about a Jewish slave, as it is obvious that the master cannot cause him harm. In fact, we want to free Jewish slaves once they've finished their servitude. Where it is a dilemma for me is in the case of the non-Jewish slave. What is the law? And Rabbi Eli said to him in response, what is the reason that this is a dilemma for you? It is taught in a baraisa with regard to the non-Jews and shepherds of small domesticated animals. We do not raise them from a pit, but we do not actively lower them into a pit either. And from this we learn that one may not cause the death of a slave, even if you cannot cause the death of a non-Jewish slave. You probably can't own him either, so this is probably a situation where you set him free. But I'm not sure about that. Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Zara, the second baraisa cited above teaches that one may go to a pagan fair and buy from the idolaters, and you can buy from them animals, slaves, and maidservants, which is to say female slaves. So does the baraisa mean that one may buy a Jewish slave, or perhaps it is teaching that one may buy even a Gentile slave? And Rabbi Zera said to him, it stands to reason that the baraisa means specifically a Jewish slave, as if it is referring to a Gentile slave, what is the reason that it is necessary for the sages to permit this purchase? When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, it is permitted to purchase even a Gentile slave because he brings him under the wings of the divine presence by having him undergo the process of conversion when he becomes the slave of a Jew, right? So if a slave comes into the home of a Jew, again, I'm not making any excuse for slavery. I'm just telling you it was a fact of life in the ancient world. But if a Canaanite slave had the good fortune to go from serving as a slave in a non-Jewish home to a Jewish home, he got a very big upgrade in his life and lifestyle. Because the other nations of the world, slaves were nothing. They were just chattel to them. They could be whipped, they could be killed, they could be beaten. They were just there to do the work and nothing else. Once that slave, even a non-Jewish slave, entered the home of a Jew, the Jew has certain obligations toward that slave. That slave has rights, right? The Torah came and gave rights even to slaves. And so among these are that slave now is going to have to eat kosher food, is going to actually start be obligated in many mitzvahs. And if that slave at a certain point should be freed, he basically would only have to immerse in the mikvah, and he's a Jew, because he's already been living as a Jew for a long time once he was a Canaanite slave that came into the ownership of a Jew and was living in a Jewish home. And that's why they say he's like coming under the wings of the Shekhinah, which is what we say about any convert to Judaism. They're coming under the wings of the divine presence. It's a holiness upgrade, as it were. Okay, and Rav Ashi said, but with regard to the permission to buy an animal, what is there about this purchase that one can be said to bring the animal under the wings of the divine presence? It makes sense that if you purchase a slave there, you bring them under the wings of the divine presence. But do we speak about animals in this manner? No, right? What does this mean? So rather, the reason it is permitted to purchase animals at the fair, according to this opinion, even though they're coming from idolaters, the reason it is permitted is because through this purchase, the Jew reduces the possessions of the Gentile. And here too, as he reduces the Gentile's property by purchasing the slave, it is permitted. Now, what's he saying here? Is it saying that, well, anytime, you're not really reducing the net worth, right, of the Gentile because you purchased the animal from him. So instead of having, 4 goats and $100, right now he has 3 goats and $200, right? So and goats are worth $100. So his net value hasn't changed. He has 1 less goat. Why is that a benefit to him? Right? We're saying it's a benefit to the idolater. Answer, because he has 1 less animal that could potentially be used as an idolatrous sacrifice. Right? You reduce the possessions that he has, which could be used in the performance of idolatry. And that's why you're doing a service actually to him. Because remember, all humans are prohibited to commit idolatry. Where am I? And the Gemara relates, Rabbi Yaakov bought sandals and Rabbi Yirmiyah bought bread at a pagan fair. And one said to the other, orphan. And here what he means by orphan is you obviously have no guide, no teacher in your life. Orphan, would your teacher act in this manner? And the other one likewise said to him, orphan, would your teacher act in this manner? And the Gemara explains what was happening here is that both of them had purchased these items from a homeowner in the fair, meaning a private individual, but each one thought that the other one had made his purchase from a merchant. So what's the difference between merchants and private individuals? Private individual is like, you go to a garage sale, you give somebody some money, very unlikely that they're going to pay taxes to the government based on that you gave them, $100 for their old dining table. They take the money, you take the table. Government not involved. Whereas if you purchase from a merchant who's doing a much bigger volume of business, he is going to have to turn over some of his proceeds as a tax, and that tax in that city, which is an idolatrous city, having a festival at that time, that was the setup for this whole discussion, that tax is going to be used for, that's public displays of idolatry, and if your money can't go to benefit that, if it did, then you wouldn't be able to take this bread or this sandal home. So each of them had thought that the other one purchased from a merchant, when in fact both of them had purchased from private individuals. As Rabbi Abba, son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, says, the sages taught that it is prohibited to buy from an idolater at a pagan fair only in the case of one who buys from a merchant, as a tax is taken from him and used for the benefit of idol worship. But with regard to one who buys from a homeowner, when a tax is not taken from him, it is permitted to make the purchase. Rabbi Abba, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, says, if Rabbi Yochanan had been present at this time and age in a place where the tax is taken from all sales, including those conducted with private individuals, he would have prohibited buying items even from a homeowner. So the Gemara asks, but if so, how did these sages, Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yirmiyah, purchase items at the fair? And the Gemara answers, they purchased the items from a homeowner who sells solely on a temporary basis, not turning money over to the government where it's going to be used for public display of idolatry. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Now we open Mishnah number 6. Excuse me. Having a little late afternoon tea. Okay, Mishnah 6. These are the items that it is prohibited to sell to an idolater at any time of year, as they are used specifically for idol worship. It's a rubalin, benot shuach, pitatoros, frankincense, and a white rooster. So we'll find out what those first 3 terms mean. Rabbi Yehuda says it is permitted to sell a white rooster to an idolater, provided that it is sold along with other types of roosters. But when it is sold by itself, one should cut off its toe and sell it to the idolater, because they don't sacrifice a defective animal to their object of idol worship. And with regard to all remaining items without specification, it is permitted to sell them, But with specification, it is prohibited to sell them. And Rabbi Meir says, even in the case of a good palm tree, chatzav and naklav, it is prohibited to sell them to the idolaters. What is the concept? You can't sell items to an idolater that he's going to use in his idol worship because you're enabling him to commit idolatry. You're kind of participating in it. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. But if there's no certainty that what you're selling is going to be used in that way, then you can go ahead and do the business. Now we're on page 14a. The Gemara analyzes the items in the Mishnah. What is the meaning of this first term? It's terubalin. This is a plant known as toranita. And the Gemara raised a contradiction from a baraisa. The sages added to the list of plants whose use is prohibited during the sabbatical year. Alekasin, it's terubalin, makasasin, and benoshuach. And if it would enter your mind to say that it's the terubalin is toranita, is there toranita that is subject to the laws of the sabbatical year? And the Gemara explains, but didn't we learn in the baraisa that this is the principle? Anything that has a root and grows is subject to the laws of the sabbatical year, right? That we don't plant our fields in the Holy Land when the temple is standing. Every 7 years, we don't plant. They give the land a year off. That's the sabbatical cycle. And anything that does not have a root is not subject to the laws of the sabbatical year. So if so, the toranita, which has no roots, is not subject to the laws of the sabbatical year, and therefore it cannot be identified as its terubalin, which is subject to the laws of the sabbatical year, and therefore it must have roots. So rather, Rav Safra says, what is its terubalin? It is the fruit of the cedar tree. And similarly, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel, and he said that Rabbi Elazar says its terubalin is the fruit of the cedar tree. The Mishnah includes benot shuach among the items one may not sell to an idolater. Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says these are white figs. And the Mishnah states this other term, and petotarot. So Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says this is not another type of fruit. Rather, the Mishnah here taught that the sale of the various fruits listed in the Mishnah is prohibited only when they are sold with their stems, not if they have been pruned. And the Mishnah taught that selling frankincense to the idolaters is prohibited. Presumably they use it in their idolatrous worship. And Rabbi Yitzchak says that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says the Mishnah is referring specifically to pure frankincense, which is used as incense for objects of idol worship. And a sage taught, and with regard to all of these items whose sale is prohibited, one may sell to idolaters a large bundle of merchandise, as it is clear that the idolater intends to sell the merchandise rather than to sacrifice all of it to his object of idol worship. So how much does a bundle weigh? And Rabbi Yehuda ben Betzera explained, for the purposes of this law, no bundle is less than the weight of 300 dinars. And the Gemara raises a difficulty, but let us be concerned lest the buyer go and sell these items to another idolater, and then the other idolater sacrifices them. So Abaye said in response, this scenario is certainly possible, but we are commanded only not to place a stumbling block before the blind, Leviticus 19:14, i.e., one may not be the direct cause of the idolater's idol worship, but we are not commanded not to place a stumbling block before one who may subsequently place it before the blind. There's a limit, to the steps of causation. You can't, make it possible for this guy to go perform idolatry, but if you sell him something that he goes and sells to someone else, that's beyond the scope of what we need to protect against. New subject. The Mishnah teaches, and it is prohibited to sell a white rooster to the idolaters. Rabbi Yonah says that Rabbi Zara says that Rav Zevit says the following ruling. And there are those who teach merely that Rabbi Yonah says that Rabbi Zara says it. If an idolater says, "Who has a rooster?" without specifying any particular type, it is permitted to sell him a white rooster. But if he says, "Who has a white rooster?" then it is prohibited to sell him a white rooster, because if an idolater is looking for a white rooster, it's a good bet good enough bet that he's looking for it in order to perform idolatry with it, not just to have a chicken dinner, and so we cannot sell him our white rooster. The Gemara raises an objection to this opinion. We learned in the Mishna that Rabbi Yehuda says he may sell a white rooster to an idolater, provided that it is sold along with other types of roosters. So what are the circumstances? If we say that the idolater says, who has a white rooster? Who has a white rooster? In that case, one may not provide him with a white rooster, even if it is sold along with other roosters, as the idolater specified that he's looking for a white rooster. Rather, is it not referring to a case where the idolater says, who has a rooster? Who has a rooster? Without mentioning a white rooster. And even so, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if he sells him a white rooster along with the other roosters, then yes, it is permitted. But selling only a white rooster by itself is not permitted. Is that what Rabbi Yehuda meant? And one can infer that according to the first Tana, who prohibits the sale of a white rooster, one may not sell him a white rooster, even if it is sold along with other roosters. This does not accord with the statement of Rabbi Yonah, who rules that if the idolater says, who has a rooster, without specifying any particular type of rooster, it is permitted to sell him even a white rooster. Right? The question again, how likely are you, by selling this white rooster to an idolater, how likely are you to be participating in his idolatry? If he's looking for a white rooster, we know we can't sell it to him. If he's just looking for roosters and we're selling him a bunch of roosters that includes a white rooster, we know we can sell it. If he's just looking for roosters generally and we sell him one white rooster, maybe not. If he's asking for a white rooster and we're selling him a bunch of roosters that includes a white rooster, probably not. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says the Mishnah is not discussing the case of an idolater who asks for a rooster without specifying its color, as everyone agrees that in such a case it is permitted to sell him a white rooster. Rather, here we're dealing with a case where the Jew had several different roosters. And the idolater says, pointing to the different roosters, sell me this one and that one. And one of the roosters that he chose was white. Now the Gemara notes that this explanation is also taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda said, when is selling a white rooster prohibited? It is prohibited when the idolater said, sell me this white rooster. But if he said, sell me this one and that one, it is permitted. And even if he said, sell me this rooster, and he pointed to a white rooster, in the case of an idolater who is preparing a feast for his son, or who has a sick person in his house, it is permitted to sell it to him, as it is clear that he wants it for the celebration, meaning a chicken dinner for the celebration, or as medicine for the sick person, or chicken soup for the sick person, and not to be used as a rite in an idolatrous ceremony. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in Mishna on page 8a, in the case of an idolater who made a feast for his son, engaging in business is prohibited only on that day and with that man alone. This indicates that in any event, conducting business on that day and with that man is prohibited. So, because we're afraid he is going to do something idolatrous, so how could we sell him a white rooster on that day? And Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Mecharshia said, the Baraisa is speaking about a picnic, i.e. a social gathering rather than a wedding feast. A mere social gathering does not include the sacrifice of offerings to idolatry, whereas a more formal celebration like a wedding, in those days, in that time, the way idolatry was practiced there would most likely include an idolatrous offering, so you have to be more careful and not sell him a white rooster. We learned in the Mishnah, and with regard to all remaining items, without specification, right? You don't have a reason to believe that the idolater will commit idolatry with it. That's what specification means. And with regard to all remaining items without specification, it is permitted to sell them. But with specification, it is prohibited to sell them. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of without specification, and what is the meaning of with specification? If we say that without specification is referring to a case where the idolater says that he wants white wheat without stating the reason that he wants it, and with specification is referring to a case when he says what he will use the wheat for, in this case for idol worship, then why is it necessary for the Mishnah to teach this law? Obviously, if he's telling you that he's going to use the product that he's buying from you for idolatry, then no matter what the item is, we can't sell it to him. So if that's the case, what does with specification, without specification come to teach us? Now we're on page 14b. It does not need to be said that when he asks for the item without specification, one may sell white wheat to him, and it does not need to be said that when he asks for it with specification, one may not sell it to him, as he expressly stated that he will use it for idol worship. So rather, when the Mishnah says that he asks without specification, this is referring to a case where the idolater says that he wishes to buy wheat, in which case it is permitted to sell it to him. If so, the case when he asks with specification is the one where he says that he wants white wheat, which is an item used in idolatry, and the Mishnah teaches that it is prohibited to sell this to him. So here the white wheat is being treated like the white rooster, right? So if he wants a white rooster, he probably wants it for idolatry, and if he's asking, I want white wheat, he probably wants it for the same reason. By inference, this means that in the case of a rooster referred to earlier in the Mishnah, even if the idolater requests without specification, i.e. without saying he wants a white one, it is not permitted to sell it to him? I don't think that's what we just read, but hold on. This conclusion contradicts the opinion of Rabbi Zara, but the Gemara rejects this argument. No, say in response that actually, without specification is referring to a case where the idolater says that he wants to purchase white wheat, and with specification is referring to a case where he says he wants it for idolatry. And as for the objection 2 paragraphs ago, that this ruling is so obvious that it is superfluous, in fact, it is necessary for the Mishnah to state the law in a case where he specified that he would use the item for idolatry. And the Gemara explains, it might enter your mind to say that this man does not really need the wheat for idolatry. Rather, he is deeply attached to idolatry, and he thought that just as that man, i.e. himself, is so attached to it, everyone else is also so attached to idol worship. Therefore, this idolater reasoned to himself, I will say this, that I intend to use the item for idolatry, so that they will give it to me. Consequently, it is necessary for the Mishnah to teach us that if he says that he intends to use the item for idolatry, it is prohibited to sell it to him, even if we think that he's actually lying, that this is just kind of a figure of speech, but now that he has said it, we can't sell it to him. Rav Ashi raised a dilemma. If an idolater asks the merchants if an idolater comes up to the merchants and says, who has a damaged white rooster? That's an interesting question. Now, the idolater is asking for a white rooster. Normally, cannot sell it to him. He's asking for a damaged white rooster. That means that he cannot offer it to his idol as a sacrifice, because they also have standards, the idolaters do, and they don't offer blemished animals. So now that he's asking for a damaged white rooster, what do we do? Why does he want a damaged white rooster? So if the idolater says to the Jewish merchants, who has a damaged white rooster? So what is the law as to whether it is permitted to sell him an unblemished white rooster? Do we say that from the fact that he says that he wants a damaged rooster, that it may be inferred that he does not need it for idolatry, as the idolaters do not sacrifice defective animals, and therefore it's permitted to sell it to him? Or perhaps he is only employing artifice. In other words, he knows that a Jew will not sell him an undamaged white rooster upon request. And as it is unlikely that someone has a damaged white rooster being sold in the marketplace, he hopes that he will receive an undamaged one. If so, it is prohibited to sell him a white rooster, even though he asked for a damaged one. So if you say that this idolater is employing artifice in the second scenario, and it is prohibited, well then in a case where he said, who has a white rooster, who has a white rooster, and they brought him a black rooster and he took it, or in a case where they brought him a red one and he took it, what is the law with regard to whether it is permitted to then sell him a white rooster? Do we say that since they brought him a black rooster and he took it, or they brought him a red rooster and he took it, evidently he does not need the rooster for idolatry? Or perhaps here too, he is employing an artifice because he knows that the Jews won't sell him a white rooster because they don't want to participate in his idolatry, and he's hoping that by buying a black and a red one from the Jews, he can then get them to sell him a white one, which he does want for idolatry. The answer to that question is teiku, unresolved. We don't know. It's a little bit too attenuated from our original question, and we don't have an answer. New subject. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Meir says it is prohibited to sell even a good palm tree and chatzav to idolaters. So Rav Chisda said to Avimei, it is learned as a tradition that the tractate of Avoda Zara of our forefather Abraham contained 400 chapters, and we have learned only 5 chapters in our tractate of Avoda Zara, and we do not even know the meaning of what we are saying. Right? It's like he's saying that we know that we can't participate in Avoda Zara in any way. And Joseph asked this question yesterday, well, what is exactly the definition of Avoda Zara that we need to avoid? And here they're saying, we know so little about Avoda Zara. Our forefather Abraham knew more because, he grew up in this world of Avoda Zara. And in fact, his father, right, Abraham's father, was an idol maker, right? A merchant who fabricated and sold idols to idol worshippers. So Abraham knew a lot about idolatry, and it's even greater merit for him that he was able to, see beyond this fake world, this false world, and understand that there's one God in the world. And he started worshiping the one God, and that really endeared him to God, and then God selected him to be the father of nations. So they're saying we don't know that much about idolatry. So Avimei asked him, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So Avimei asked him, and what in the Mishnah here poses a difficulty for you? Okay, you say that Abraham knew much more than we do. What is it that's confusing you? So he replied, I do not understand the Mishnah, which teaches the following. Rabbi Meir says, it is prohibited to sell even a good palm tree, chatzav, and naklas to idolaters. From this, it may be inferred that it is a good palm tree that one does not sell to the idolaters. Therefore, one may sell a bad palm tree. But didn't we learn in another Mishnah on page 19b that one may not sell to idolaters anything that is attached to the ground? So Avimei said to him, what is the meaning of a good palm tree? It means the detached fruit of a good palm tree. And similarly, Rav Huna says the Mishnah means the fruit of a good palm tree. We don't sell that, but we can sell the fruit of a bad palm tree. But we don't sell palm trees that are still attached to the ground. The Gemara explains the meaning of the other terms that appear in the Mishnah. Chatzav is a type of date known as kashba. With regard to the meaning of naklas, the Gemara relates, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said that Rabbi Chama Bar Yosef said that it is referring to koreete. And Abaye said to Rav Dimi, we learned in the Mishnah naklas, and we did not know what it is. And now you have said that what it actually means is koreate, and we also don't know what that is. So how have you helped us? And Rav Dimi said to him, I have in fact helped you, as when you go there to Eretz Yisrael and say to them naklas, and they don't know what it means, you can say to them, I mean koreate, and then they will know what it is, and they will show it to you. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 1. We'll pick it up, God willing, with Mishnah number 7 tomorrow at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Take a few comments and questions. Sharon, in prior situations, a consecrated animal that could not be sacrificed was put to pasture and was not worked nor used for one's benefit. Why couldn't they just do that? It's a great question. I ought to know the answer. I don't know the answer. There is definitely a difference, because even when the temple was standing, there were some animals that needed to be destroyed in this way, left to starve. Where allowing them to go to pasture and develop a blemish, like when you put them to pasture, it's because you're waiting for them to develop a blemish. Once it develops a blemish, it is unfit for the altar. And I think the issue there is, and then you could bring a substitute. But until then, you can't. But when there is no temple, there's no possibility of a substitute. And so that process is off the table. That's off the top of my head. I could be wrong. Bill, do we read out from this that if an idolater is being specific about the type of animal, we cannot sell? For example, if an idolater says who has a black rooster, do we respond as if he asked for a white one? Sounds like no. You probably asked that before we got that later in the day on the page, because you can sell him a black rooster, since it seems pretty clear that he doesn't want it. Now, if we're concerned about the artifice, that he's going to buy a black rooster and then he's going to ask for a white rooster. I guess we're still not worried that we sold him a black rooster because they didn't, use black roosters for idolatry, only white roosters. And really what it seems to be the preponderance of the evidence in these various cases, there seems to be like room for interpretation. Is this guy really trying to get a white rooster from me so that he can use it for idolatry or not? And then the question is, how sure do we have to be? A mere possibility that will be used by idolatry down the line, we don't have to worry about. If it's like he's buying, 3 dozen roosters, a few white ones are included, and we think that this is a merchant who's going to turn around and sell these roosters to other people, there it seems very likely that one of those white roosters might end up in the hands of some other idolater. But we're not worried about that, because don't place a stumbling block before the blind only applies to the person before you, not the one several transactions down the line. Bill also says, follow-up, if the idolater specified, but in the specification said he wasn't going to use it for idolatry, say asking for white wheat to make pastry, can we believe him? I mean, it seems like if you're not, it's not like you need to become a detective every time, right? There has to be a limit to how much doubt we need to rule out before we're allowed to make the sale. It's not that I have to go do this long investigation. So, it seems like it's probably one of those situations where, okay, based on the behavior in a certain period, they said, okay, well, this is the kind of people that want it for idolatry, and these are the kind of people that don't. So if they fall into the category of don't, you could sell to them. But then the ones who were looking for white roosters realized they couldn't get them in these areas, and that they could get them if they changed their language. So then, over here on the Jewish end, they're like, oh, they got wise to the fact that we don't sell to people who want it for idolatry, so now they're using a subterfuge along the lines of such and such, so now when they say such and such, you can't sell to them. So probably this law was always evolving, and therefore us making conclusions about it, there's a limit to what we can say. The general principle is, we have to have good reason to believe that it will not be used for idolatry by the person in front of us. Renee, maybe he's hoping to breed the damaged rooster to possibly get more white roosters. So what do you think? Let's say that is what he wants. Do we now have to not sell him the damaged white rooster that he's going to use to breed white roosters for idolatry? Sounds to me like if he says, I will need a damaged white rooster so I can breed roosters for idolatry, that's too specific. We probably won't sell it to him. But if he doesn't say that, even if we're suspicious of that, I think probably the linkage becomes attenuated enough that we probably could sell it. I'm guessing, but that would be that's what my instinct tells me about that. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Have a great night.